Good morning, friends. I thought we would go over some more of Nick's Facebook messages today. We would continue where we left off on his messages with Caitlin. Just a moment here. The last thing we read, they're talking on February 4th, 2014, 1 year before Nick and Gypsy met at the Cinderella movie, and about a year and a half into their online relationship. Nick's telling this girl that he's psychic, she needs to remember, blah, 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 and is trying to be dirty with her right away after whenever he very first got the message from her, he was in all caps, like, why are you trying to contact me again? Ah! Okay. Where we left off, Nick told Caitlin, let's just say, being able to witness in more than one dimension all of everyone's suffering in ways that would make me scream as if I was having a nightmare at night, when the truth is, at times, my soul is forced to see things that is true hell on earth. Caitlin says, I can understand. Nick says, and I'm going to try and talk kind of monotone like Nick does to differentiate between the two of them. Nick says, should I continue because I would start to force tears in your eyes by what I could describe to you? And then he says again, because I know the very essence of how good your soul is, and that's why I know you would cry. Caitlin says, can you tell how old someone is without knowing their birth date? Nick says, I had a question for you first, Caitlin. Caitlin says, I'm not as emotional as I used to be. Caitlin says, I'd rather know than not. Nick says, imagine people's heads getting unalived. People forced to wear a symbol that means they sold their soul without even knowing it. People losing limbs, thinking it is good for everyone else, when the truth is they were being deceived. Maybe even the fact that children got butchered by strangers in hatred in ways that makes innocent look far from fair to live that way. Okay. Caitlin says, yeah, it's pretty horrible. Nick says, that is only a glimpse of what I have seen, though. Like I said, me having the soul inside me is more of a curse than anything else. Nick says, I am getting emotional thinking about all this. I'm going to try and stop, and hopefully the emotion won't overcome me. Caitlin says, I understand that. I feel like I'm going through the motions of the day every day. Nothing seems to change. I don't get excited over little things anymore. I post things because it's expected. Otherwise, I'm not mentally healthy according to everyone else. It's a damn joke being a part of this era. Nick said, Caitlin, from what I know, I'll just stop it at this. Think of it this way. Everything is connected to something. So if everything is connected to something, that means things are all connected together. Only our actions can change, but they were inevitable to be one action or another. No matter what, we walk a path we might not know is already there, but it is. Caitlin says, choices. Nick says, what I said is true, though. You may think you have tons of choices, but the truth is you choice what you did naturally, even if it was meant to be with reason. It was also meant to happen. I see the existence differently than everyone. Of course, I suppose that is the only reason why it is a good thing I have this soul in me, even though he is purely evil. Nick does a little correction here. He says, you choose what you did. Caitlin says, I know this. So, got a question for you. And Nick says, I have a feeling I don't want to know the question, but ask it anyways. Caitlin says, how old does my soul seem to be to you? Be honest. And Nick says, I knew you were going to ask me this. Caitlin, your soul is 421 years old. Nick says, I wonder if I forgot the ending of it. I just remember it is over 400 years old. Caitlin says, physically? Because I remember things according to my family I wasn't around for. And Nick says, Caitlin, it is part of your premonitions, is the only reason you can see things before your soul, but you are over 400 years old spiritually. Caitlin says, according to record, I'm physically turning 21 in 28 days. Nick says, so I was a little early on the age. So right now, spiritually, you are 420 years old. Okay, spiritual age relates to physical birthday. Alrighty, Nick. Good God. Nick says, while I am 1,324 years old spiritually. What? I thought he was a 500-year-old vampire. Anyway, Caitlin says, the thing is, I was supposed to be born February. I was born later. Caitlin says, LOL, go figure, 420, LOL. And Nick says, yes, this is your fourth lifetime, while it is my 13th. And Caitlin says, my big question that you probably couldn't answer is why was I born? And why in March? Nick says, if you weren't born when you were, you wouldn't have been born at all, Caitlin. As for the other question, you were born for your child. And if I was with you, I suppose that's why you have the love you do for me. But right now, your child is the reason you were born to be a mother. And yes, I do see you turning your life around sooner than you would think. Caitlin says, turning my life around in what way? Nick says, Caitlin, think about all you plan on doing, and you know what I am talking about. Caitlin says, job, getting my son back in a place. Yeah, I'm working on that like I have been since November 20th. Yeah, that's how long it's been since we left Kansas. Nick says, ironic. I was just thinking about a 20th of last year and that one came to mind. Caitlin, I must say, don't try and get your son back as soon as you have the other two. You will learn the hard way why I say this. Wait a bit, visit him a while before you attempt it, or your life will start to decline. Caitlin says, there's no custody arrangement. My mother's pretty much taking care of him until I get on my feet. Nick says, I guess you'll learn what I mean the hard way, it sounds like. That's your choice. Caitlin says, he doesn't even act like I'm his mother anymore. Sad face. Nick says, Caitlin, I'll help you whenever you choose to listen to me. It's pretty much up to you, though. I'll say one thing about your son. He knows you are his mother. He may not show or acknowledge it due to resentment. Caitlin says, what? From taking him away from his father? He headbutts me, smacks me in the face, screams at me, pulls my hair. Nick says, no, no, Caitlin, for not being womanly enough to raise them by yourself. That is why. And Caitlin says, remember, my son's a Leo and I'm a Pisces. Doesn't that just spell disaster? Nick says, ha ha ha, Caitlin. He can still get along with you, but what I said is true. Caitlin says, I've been trying to get him, but remember how I spent the last years of my teens foster care? They're threatening to take him unless I do all this stuff, which I am trying. My only choice was to send him to my mother. Otherwise, I'd lose him and never get him back. Nick says, I already knew all this, Caitlin. You need a job and a place. Then wait like I told you to do in the first place. Then believe me, you'll know when to get him from his grandmother, since it will just seem like a natural moment when the time is right to do so. Caitlin says, okay, damn, I'm freezing. Sad face. Nick says, I remember when you used to say that all the time. Caitlin says, no, seriously, it's friggin' frigid in here. And Nick says, I know, you told me this before. Caitlin says, plus currently I'm sick. Nick says, I knew that. And Caitlin says, ugh. Oh my God. Nick says, there is only so much you could do to warm up since, well, it's obvious on this. Caitlin says, huh? And Nick says, you know what I am saying, whether you realize it or not. Caitlin says, I'm confused. Nick says, no, you are not. You have not really anyone to help you warm up. So, all you could do is have other ways to keep warm. Caitlin says, been under two blankets and yet I'm still cold. And Nick says, it's because you're sick, is why, Caitlin. Caitlin says, sneezy and congested. Nick says, oh, yes, I know. Caitlin says, think it's from the black mold in here. Nick says, you may think that, but when you are sick in general, you are never warm, is truth. Caitlin says, there's black mold above where I sleep. Nick says, I know. God. Caitlin says, quit spying on me. LOL. You probably know I'm sitting up in bed under the covers, messy pigtails, black spaghetti strap shirt on, black yoga pants, and a gold necklace with a green round stone encased, right? Nick says, I know more than that, Caitlin, and I am not spying on you. I am like next to you in a spiritual way you can't see. Caitlin says, okay, what am I doing besides messaging you? Nick says, shivering and keep looking up at the mold you love to talk about so much, even though I gave you the true reason why you are cold. What the fuck? Ugh. Caitlin says, nope, I'm warming up and just sitting here thinking about what to make for lunch. And Nick says, I know you were looking at the mold too, though. Don't try to lie to me. And yes, I already knew about lunch. Oh, and you say you are warming up. You'll think you are warm before you realize you are sweating. Caitlin says, LOL, no fever. No, actually, I wasn't looking at the ceiling. LOL, I was looking at my phone. Nick says, wrong. You were looking at it when you were talking about you being cold. You can't fool me, Caitlin. And as for your phone, yes, I knew about that too. Nick says, how you were always harassed by someone as well. Caitlin says, LOL. I know because I have to look at my phone to text. LOL. I hate Android phones though. Then Caitlin sent 3 question marks. And Nick says, wow, you forget things fast. Nick says, it must have never bothered you if you forgot already. Caitlin says, I'm confused. And Nick says, did someone threaten you like crazy on your phone? I wonder. Caitlin says, my son's father did. Do you enjoy vibrating my breast when you message me or something? LOL. What the fuck? Okay, Caitlin's trying to go a little dirty. Nick says, yes, I know he did. And Caitlin says, answer the question. Oh, she's trying to dominate him now since he keeps doing her. Nicholas says, you can figure that out by yourself, I believe. And Caitlin says, LOL. Caitlin says, I had to jack a piece of cake. LOL. She means steal a piece of cake? I'm so confused. Nicholas says, that's right, Caitlin. Use your brain. I know you can figure out that answer yourself. Caitlin says, LOL. Ain't no surprise if you enjoyed it. LOL. Nick says, see, you know it already. Caitlin says, not quite as satisfying as hearing it from you. LOL. Nicholas says, and I am not surprised either that you admitted that. Caitlin says, LOL, no comment. Nick says, no, it's more like, gee, we could get going, but it's probably a bad idea to do is what you are thinking by saying no comment. Caitlin says, oh, what? You always did find it easy to confuse me. Nick says, he, good. Caitlin says, how is that good? Nick says, because I find it fun to do. Caitlin says, damn, now my entire mind has landed in the gutter. Caitlin sends a unsure face. Nick says, I do it every time. Ha ha ha. Caitlin says, grrr. Nick says, how about that? Caitlin says, how about what? Nick says, where your mind is, it must be quite fun. Ha ha ha. Caitlin says, ha ha, landed in BDSM territory. LOL. Why am I always the submissive one? Ugh. Nick says, you think you may prefer the other way around, but you are excited by the submissive side is why. Caitlin says, damn, my sex life is boring. LOL. Nick says, well, I already know I couldn't please you. I seen the future and got over it a long time ago. Caitlin says, no offense to my man, but I get a feeling he's not all that attracted to me. He doesn't get a complete boner when it comes to me. Seems rather forced. Nicholas says, well, I used to get one when I was with you. Heck, it can still happen, but I already know I can't please you, so I suppose that is why there would be no sense in trying. That's interesting because we know Nick has trouble with that with Gypsy. Caitlin says, please me how? I'm not as experienced as you might think. Nick says, Caitlin, it's true. I already know I couldn't please you. It isn't possible in me. I think I know exactly how experienced you are, but it isn't possible for me to make you see you am. It is that simple. Caitlin says, honestly, it doesn't take much. God. Nick says, you may say that with me, but I could try all the time and it wouldn't be possible. I know it is sad to admit that, but I don't lie. That's the thing. Caitlin was like, I'm actually pretty easy. And that first time but I can't do the multiple O's. Caitlin says, I had C-section, not vaginal delivery. And Nick says, Caitlin, I already see the future. With me trying, of course. That soul forced me to see it, even though I was scared to. But he made me see it. My dick isn't enough to please you. I know it isn't. Caitlin says, size don't matter. Nick says, that was all not possible after a certain event happened. And no, I don't want to bring it back up because it's painful for us both when I do. Someone stretched you is all I will say. God. Caitlin says, I tightened my muscles back up, back to normal now. Caitlin says, I know how to use my muscles down there, which helps both parties. Probably should have kept that to myself. Oh my God, friends. Is this around the time that Nick told Gypsy to do kegels and for the tight holes? I got to go check that time period. Just a moment. Okay, so on the Gypsy's video where she talks about her kegels and her tightened holes, the date modified on that one is February 8th, 2015. So we don't know if that is the date created. but it looks like it was definitely after this conversation. Maybe by a year, maybe by less. We don't know. But that's interesting, I thought, friends. What do y'all think? Okay, back to the messages. Caitlin says, my current man has a medium sized one when he's hard enough, but even a soft boner, he says I'm almost too tight. God. Nicholas says, I realize something. Why am I talking about this with you when I am with someone? I'll just shut up now, only because it would be different if I was with you, but yeah, I guess you could say I lost my control of myself for a moment there. Caitlin says, so did I. Shit, I am sorry. Cry face. And Nick says, Caitlin, I'll say this only because I don't want to lie to you, and I find it hard to do at times, even when I was to want to lie, I can't. If I could have you, I would, but we are where we are, and it isn't fair to others if we were due to do something unreasonable. I guess that is why I said in the future, but yeah, that's funny. Nick would rather be with her than Gypsy, but he feels like he's already married by voodoo. Okay, Caitlin says, okay, I'll talk to you later. Need to get myself together. Nick says, Kay, just know that us having what we do about each other is for a reason. And if a future happens to be a certain way, I guess I'll let karma take its course. Then, I guess I'll talk to you later whenever I am able to be on again. And Caitlin says, not disappearing, just need a few minutes. And what? Nick says, sorry, for a second I lost thought in myself. I guess I want to say to you, what I want to say to you is I know we are with people. Yes, I'll try to contain my feelings better, but if they come out, I'll just see it as they were meant to happen. Caitlin says, I completely understand as I myself have been biting my tongue. Nick says, I don't know why certain Taurians vibe naturally with certain Pisces. We tend to be that certain kind of both. I always told you I would only show you the real me. I guess if I let any of my feelings out about you in the future, yes, I understand you admitted that you can understand that I'll just see it as it was meant to happen. But when I let them out, it's because they were never meant to be contained. Remember that. And then Nick says again, I say that because that is what just happened. The feelings that did happen to come out weren't meant to be contained because they weren't. I had to show you them. Caitlin says, I miss you like mad. Nick says, yes, I feel it. I couldn't control myself because I did feel it. So it made me want to go in the sexual area. And you followed, like you said, like you used to always do when we were together. It made me miss you even more, but then I realized you are a more improved you. So I figured just maybe you weren't taken from me, but rather forced your way back into my life in a way that means what our bond shows it means. Caitlin says, is Victor fighting you right now? Oh my God. Nick says, I can't help but still be attracted to you. You are really still the most beautiful ex of mine out of them all that never changed even after all this time. It's like all I could do is miss you. Even after you were on here, I still do. As for him, me and him don't really fight, but damn, nothing seems different with our bond. Even after all that time you've been gone, I can't understand it. Caitlin says, I still have that feeling of being magnetically pulled towards you. Will Victor talk to me? Nick says, why do you want to talk to him? Caitlin says, I don't know. I'm being drug into it by something. Nick says, I see. I'll let you talk to him if you want. Then here he is. Nick says, what would Caitlin want me to talk to? Caitlin says, no idea. Something was pushing me to talk to you. And Nick says, ha ha ha, I see. If you think it was me doing to you in some kind of spiritual sense, no, you would know the only thing I would want from you. Otherwise, I wouldn't really talk to you, I would think. Caitlin says, I know this. Well, I've seen a new side of me wanting to speak to you. Nick says, I see. This should be interesting. And Caitlin says, I know, right? This one seems wishy washy to me, but here. What? Nicholas says, ha ha ha, I'll be able to tell that right away. Caitlin says, about fucking time I get my way with her. Fuck, her new man needs to take a flying fucking leap. Is she role playing that she's in another personality now and talking about herself? I don't know. I'm so confused. Nick says, ha ha ha. I could see that. However, I hear she isn't much of a compatible to him. Then again, why would that not surprise me? Caitlin says, dude, this guy smokes pot like it's going out of style. He's a bore in bed. I mean, who wants to see missionary position 24/7? Hella boring. Ugh. Nick says, ha ha ha. I can see what you were saying. Wow, I don't care to speak about that, even though Nick can't control himself around Caitlin. One of these times, I'm going to have to shut him up myself because he might be more entertaining than who you speak of, but he feels he isn't worthy of her, even though she has done all the worst to him. Makes no fucking sense to me. Oh, yeah, she is doing a multiple personality thing herself because this is Caitlin speaking, and she talks about herself in third person here. She says, Kate's been keeping me shut in the dark as she seems to believes, but I found something out that you may not know about her. Nick says, what is that about her I wouldn't know? Nick says, even if it was to be interesting. Caitlin says, well, Jeff was really in her life, but she never had feelings for him. Her father was disappointed in her for being with Nick because of how old he was and had no job. Kate was thinking about Nick the entire time, biding her time until she got out from under Jeff's control, but was afraid to tell you that she was really in love with Nick and has been this whole time, and she's sorry for hurting you two. Nick says, I see. Well, Nick, you and her, I might as well expose this because, as he knows, I have a way with telling it as is. He might hate me for it later, but oh well. Something he doesn't want her to know is that he realizes that's why he let her come back into his life. What is it, 8 times that she already has because he is naturally attracted to her beauty. I suppose it is a good thing they aren't in person because if she tried hard enough, she could get him to cheat on the one he is with, even though he has never met her in person. She could probably do it. He knows this. I know. I suppose that is part of him being naturally attracted to her, whether she is towards him. And I guess she has always had a personality that makes it impossible for him to stop talking to her. No wonder, even when he was made, he couldn't stop talking to her. Now he is pissed at me, but the truth has been spoken. He said, even though he has never met her in person, but I don't know if he's talking about Caitlin or Gypsy here. Caitlin says, Kate doesn't trust anyone much, and if he mentions this to her, she'll know I blabbed. Nick says, well, I know she used to trust him more than anyone. I guess it's almost like he somehow can get her to open up about anything. I never understood it, but yes. And what about the whole naturally attracted to him thing, since he seems to have that towards her, which he is wishing I would just shut up before I reveal more in a way that would be hard to not understand? Caitlin says, yes, she is naturally attracted to him too. He is constantly on her mind. In fact, she still cries herself to sleep at night. When she's around that dude that she's dating, she feels completely alone and her thoughts always shift to Nick and she barely talks to this lame ass guy she's with. Nick says, it sounds like trouble for Nick then. What would she do, would you think, if she had a chance to touch Nick, meaning be around him? I don't know how strong it seems towards her. I just know that he already seen what would happen if she did touch him. He would lose control, and I can believe it too. Caitlin says, hey, she's got a tear rolling down her cheek. And Nick says, okay, I figured you would want to answer my question, though, if you don't mind. Nick says, so I know how connected they may be since, well, I would say it seems they are very connected still. Caitlin says she doesn't want to cause problems with anyone. She's almost to the point of giving up completely on ever being happy. Nick says, well, I figured if she was around him, she could make him cheat, is my point. They have that kind of connection, it seems, to where it never goes away. But then again, that is the way it seems to me. Caitlin says, I don't think she'd do that. She's a mother first, friend second, and anything else is at the end of the list right now. She really has nobody but a wannabe gangsta boyfriend, if you can even call him that. She hates wannabes. Nick says, well, I know she is capable of what I said. It's good that she doesn't try. If she was to, she would succeed. And I know that by how Nick sees her. I think Nick might make me shut up soon. So if I stop talking, at least you know. Caitlin says she doesn't want someone who she has to share. So doubtful. Nick says, well, I made my clear point up. Nick says, I think it is enough of him talking, seriously. Caitlin says, what's the matter with us talking? She can't even see what is being said. Nick says, it doesn't mean she can't see it later on. And besides, it's bad enough that he said enough about what is true. Yes, I can't control myself around her. I know I couldn't. I figured that would be enough. It isn't like he has to say all of what should be obvious to where it is not out in the open. Nick says again, but rather is out in the open now, it seems. Caitlin says, she's not going to see nothing. I delete messages when needed. Nick says, well, fine. I got to go though before it gets any later, and hopefully Victor can stop saying too much. I don't want it to where all of a suddenly I find myself overwhelmed by her. Then again, yeah, I'll admit I brought it on myself. It happens. Caitlin says, she won't see nothing. Nick says, if you say, anyways, talk to her, talk to you or her later, and hopefully I'm not overwhelmed in the future. Caitlin says, okay, TTYL. And then, like, an hour and some minutes later, Caitlin says, Nick? And Nick says, what is it? Caitlin says, what the hell just happened? Nick says, all I know is that your other part of you knows too much about me, and I am not fully happy about it thanks to Victor. But I got to get home now since I am at the library, so a good night to you. Oh shit, he's at the library? This is during the time period he didn't have Wi-Fi, I guess. Must be, and it's also post the McDonald's incident. Caitlin says, hopefully he didn't tell you too much. Okay, good night. Nick says, well, Victor got practically all about you out pretty much in exchange about me. So believe me, they both know about each other. I only know the part about myself being talked about, but not you. So I have no clue what was said about you, hun. Caitlin says, ugh, he deleted all the messages too? And Nick says, yeah, something tells me Victor is going to tell me what he learned about you. At this point, that part of you might as well say what he learned about me. It's only fair, though, even though I'll hate Victor for it later on, even though I am still pissed at him, I literally had to shut him up. Caitlin says, no, this one's more secretive than others. Nick says, hun, I feel bad for you then, because every time Victor knows about something he learned, he always tell me, I'm sorry I agreed to let him out. I shouldn't have did that now. Damn, I feel bad because I did. Caitlin says, don't worry about it. I'll live. Caitlin says, if you ever want to talk, here's my number, and gave her her phone number. Nick says, I hope so. Okay, I am starting to stutter because I don't want to do that because I don't want to worry you, Caitlin. Please, please, please have a good night. And I'll want to talk to you as soon as I can since, well, I felt so bad for earlier to the point I feel like when I can get a chance, I'll tell you what he said about me since I always said I wanted things to be even between us. So with that said, have a good night and hope to talk to you soon. Caitlin says, don't even worry about telling me. The less I know, the better. After all, we're both seeing other people. No need to further complicate matters. I will be here on the daily. So, yeah, have an amazing night. Relax and get some rest. Good night. Smile. Next is Caitlin. I am still going to tell you the next time I am online. I feel that it is the right thing to do. So, I will. And yes, you have a good night too. Caitlin says, Nicholas, I don't even need nor do I wish to know what was said between them. Good night. Smile. Nick says, well, that is what you may say, but what I feel is right to do is what I will do, always. Anyways, good night, hun. Caitlin says, good night, Nicholas Paul Curry Godejohn. And then Nick says, sighs, and then says good night to her by her full name. And then some hours later, he says, it's on the same day, he says, Caitlin, are you awake? And then Nick says, I guess not. Hopefully you are soon, though, since I wish to talk to you. And then again, 2 hours later, Caitlin, are you awake yet? And 7 minutes later, he says, if you aren't up by the next hour, I'm just going to stop trying to see if you are awake. Then about 50 minutes later, he says, now last time, are you awake now, Caitlin? 7 minutes later, he says, well, I waited long enough. Talk to you some other time, Caitlin. About an hour later, so she messages, maybe an hour and a half, says, sorry, just woke up. And Nick says, okay, I see. I knew you were in a different time zone. Wasn't sure when you were going to wake up. Caitlin says, it's noon 30, lol. Nick says, 12:30 here. Yeah. Caitlin says, lol, I know. And Caitlin says, "How's this for a smoothie?" And sends him some sort of Facebook attachment. Nick says, "It's interesting." Caitlin says, "Don't ask what's in it. That's where it gets to sounding peculiar." Nick says, "K." And then Nick says, anyways, about yesterday, I just wanted you to know that I do still have a natural attraction to you that seemingly can't be broken, even after all this time. I have seen you grow up from where you were younger. That attraction is still there. I guess it will never go away. So I guess you have power over me, more power over me than you may realize. But that was mainly said yesterday." Caitlin says, "So what's up?" And Nick says, "I told you that I would remember, so I did, and it had to be said." Caitlin says, "I'm more worried about what was said about me. I'm tired of dragging everyone through the mud." Nick says, "Well, I know you have a natural attraction towards me as well, Caitlin. I did tell you that Victor would tell me everything he learns, and I know him well." Caitlin says, "Ugh, oh well, I guess." Nicholas says, "I know you were crying yourself almost every night because of how much you thought about me." Nick says, "And you saying, I guess, means you are ashamed of it, even though I have nothing to be ashamed of about. Yes, I might be with someone else, but if I feel a certain way, it's because I was meant to. There is no use hiding something that is true." Caitlin says, "Well, this isn't embarrassing at all. Ugh." Nick says, "Well, if you say it isn't, even though I know you are telling probably a different story than what I got about you." Caitlin says, "I'm not ashamed, but that little fucker had no right." Nick says, "Apparently, he said things you might be pregnant. Apparently, he said that you might be pregnant with someone you are with's kid. And he said he's seen signs of it, even though you are unaware of them from what he said." Caitlin said, "It's all true, though." Nick said, "If that it's true, then you might start making me see you as someone completely different than what I remember." And Caitlin said, "Wow, foot in mouth. It was for everything above that message." Nicholas says, "I understand you didn't have feelings for Jeff at the time you were with him, but getting pregnant again while you have feelings for me is just wrong. Like you are with someone who, from what he told me in his own words, is boring. I don't need to get any further into this because it angers me on the kind of person it seems like you are becoming." Caitlin says, "I've had sex like 3 times in almost 7 months. I had my monthly after the last time." Nick says, "Yeah, and he already told me the position you do. Do you have any clue how likely you are to get pregnant from doing missionary position every time? And it seems like you weren't doing protection. That almost sounds like you didn't care if you got pregnant." Sighs. Caitlin says, "I honestly don't want another kid until I'm completely stable and on my feet for several years or married." Caitlin says, "You wouldn't like me now, anyways." Nick says, "Well, you are what it is at a 63% chance, I believe it was, of getting pregnant. I want to believe that you want to be stable before having another kid. I do, but it's hard to believe. And why do you say what you just said?" Caitlin says, "I drink. Not all the time, about 3 days a month, and it's always clear vodka or tequila." Nick says, "What else are you going to say that makes you think I won't like you now?" Caitlin says, 222.8 is what I weigh now. Granted, 18 months ago, I weighed 280. Nick says, "You still lost weight, so I am happy for you. And as for the drinking, I wouldn't care as long as I was there to make sure you were safe while you did it. But I believe if I remember what you told you aren't you a bitch when you are drinking?" Caitlin says, "Nope, I just laugh a lot and you can't get me to shut up for nothing." Nick says, "Okay, so bubbly, got it. But Caitlin, I guess the only reason why I wouldn't put up with your BS if we were together is the fact that you keeping a man right now is your lowest concern. And when I said I didn't change, it's true. I didn't. I still would have you up there with my children on how important you would be to me. I remember a time you used to be like, I would be so protective of you, I would go crazy on them as if you were my own kid. But I can tell you seem colder in a way that I remember, maybe wiser, but also colder." Caitlin says, "I've gone through a lot over the years." Nick says, "Yeah, I can tell you still trust me, even though Even all this time, I used to always talk about how our souls just naturally vibe with each other in more than one way. Hell, I even used to show you proof of what I was saying. Seems I know you trust very little nowadays, but for you to tell me what you were going through speaks to that somehow I still have your trust, which does surprise me, figuring that you haven't got to talk to me in so long. You would wonder if you could trust me any longer until you, well, learn I am the same man you knew before the last time we talked for the last long wait. Oh my God, y'all, the way he writes is so hard to read. Caitlin says, it was more of a last straw deal. I've lost friends and family that supported me emotionally. Now I have very few people that can get through to me, none of which have gotten anything out of me, how I feel and what I've been through in my life besides you. Nick says, Caitlin, don't say it as a last straw deal because I know, yes, I may have been the only trustworthy one the entire time. You know, you have known me, but that is because I refuse to let anyone change who I am. I know you have been through some pretty abhorrent things, but did you keep any of the Caitlin I knew in you at all? And Nick says again, at all? Nick says again, sorry about that. I mean, at all? And Caitlin says, deep down, yes, I'm still her, just wearing a protective armor, so to speak. I don't let people get too close to me. Generally, if anyone gets too close, I push them away as a test. Many don't care to challenge me, but one always has and is still doing good. Nick says, well, if you are talking about me, then yes, I have always had you push me away. Then the next thing you know, I always seem to be here no matter how many times you were to hurt me, which is an innumerable number of times. Caitlin says, yes, I'm talking about you. Smoothie with Bacardi rum. Am I in heaven? And Caitlin sends a winky face. Nick says, LOL. Nick says, well, I figured you were talking about me because I have never let you down. And I think that is why you still trust me to this day. Besides, well, our attraction to each other. And yes, I even did admit earlier about my feelings, but it is like a spiritual flow we have that seems to easily follow. It seems the best way to put it. Caitlin says, and unfortunately, we're with different people and need to keep it down. Nick says, Caitlin, I am not going to hide what feels right to show. So if I say something that might have been past the friend line, that is only because I was never fake to you and I refuse to be that way. Caitlin says, Nicholas, you have a woman already. Nick says, Caitlin, I might have one, but why hide something that is in there? It is ludicrous to do. He spelt it like the rapper, ludicrous. It's like ignoring a cut when you should let it be bandaged and taken care of. Caitlin says, I'm a very jealous woman. Nick says, Caitlin, come on. That just shows you care. So that is the only reason why it's okay to me that you are jealous. Just know one thing though. I have been able to cut out every one of my exes except you. Have you ever thought of why that is? And that's funny because we know that he actually didn't. He didn't cut out any of his other exes. He was still talking to most of them. Oh my God, y'all, this is getting long. I'm going to go ahead and cut off here. So overall, my feeling after seeing Nick roleplay different personalities with an ex, this does seem like something Nick did before to me. And my conclusion from that is Gypsy definitely sought him out due to these qualities and others like his autism, etc. Like her Greene County cellmate said. One of her Greene County cellmates said that she was talking to Gypsy about Nick and said to her, like, dude, he gets a check and everything with his autism. Did you know that? Did you seek him out? And she said, Gypsy replied, I probably did. I believe 100% the only reason why Gypsy tolerated Nick's off putting ways is because she wanted him to do a job for her, the ultimate job. And she saw qualities in Nick that made her believe he was the one that she could convince to do it. Because personally, I don't believe at all that Nick was the only person that she asked. That's just my opinion. And even after their arrest, she still had a job for him to do. That job was not to turn on her. I wonder sometimes if Nick had quicker processing capabilities and would have come to the conclusion sooner that he needed to make clear the full extent of Gypsy's part, would she still have gotten that plea deal? Because I think the first time we see her start hating on Nick is in the Dr. Phil interview. And by this point in her sentence, her dad, Rod Blanchard, was circulating a petition for Gypsy's early release for clemency. So with this change, a possibility of her being out earlier and Nick already having his life sentence. What job does she need for Nick to do now? She needed him to be the object of her hatred in order to display public remorse that she'd never shown for her murder, for her matricide. Because I don't personally think she feels it. But who would sign that petition if she said something like, well, I appreciate what Nick did and I'm sorry for his sentence? She needed to act out remorse. So once again, Nick had a job, but this time he was a prop. That's my opinion, friends. Let me know what y'all think. We will do a little palate cleanser to go out with. I hope everyone's having a really good day. And let me know what y'all think in the comments, friends. I will try and finish reading the rest of this one in the next video. Have a good day, y'all.